and gentlemen, give it up for the Stockton Helbing Quartet, you guys!
Like, wait a minute, that's Duke Ellington's theme song. I thought we were talking about Billy Strayhorn. Well, yes, Billy Strayhorn wrote Duke Ellington's theme song. So let's have ultra short jazz history lesson. The most important person in the history of jazz music is Louis Armstrong. So he's like number one, right? Well, number 1.1, like if Louis is 1A, Duke Ellington is 1B.
Right.
So how in the world did Duke Ellington not write his own theme song? That's mysterious, right? Well, there was a recording band enforced in the 1930s by ASCAP because they felt that their artists were not getting fair pay for their music being played on radio. Overnight, Duke Ellington and his hit records and his touring career where they were playing these Duke Ellington hits, he couldn't use any of his own music. So he had to ask his son Mercer, along with a brand new, young, talented composer-arranger that he had hired from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, named Billy Strayhorn, to, in 10 days, rewrite his entire library so they could finish their tours. And that song, Take the A-Train, was based on the instructions that Ellington gave Billy Strayhorn on how to find his home in New York when he got there. And the first line on the directions said, "First, you take the A-Train." And Strayhorn actually thought that it was not a good song. He threw it in the trash, literally. And amidst the frenzy of Mercer, Ellington, and him trying to write tunes to get to Duke so they had something to play on tour, Mercer found it in the trash can. And he uncrumpled it and said, "This is a cool looking song, we should do this." And he uncrumpled the score and they parted it out and mailed it and it became a hit. And it speaks, first of all, to the genius and humility of Duke Ellington for letting his theme song be a song he didn't write, but also to the level of expectation that this, at the time, young composer put on himself, Billy Strayhorn, and the level of excellence he expected from what he wrote. It's amazing, in just the first 10 years of his association with Ellington, people weren't really sure he even existed. And the old adage started to grow, you can't decipher the way Billy Strayhorn writes from the way Duke Ellington writes. As a matter of fact, Duke Ellington famously said of Billy Strayhorn, "He is my right hand and he is my left hand. He is all the eyes in the back of my head. His brain waves are my brain waves and mine are his." They were very close, and Strayhorn wrote so similar to Ellington, not because he could only do that, but because that was his level of genius. So one of my favorite early compositions, other than Take the A-Train, that Billy Strayhorn wrote for the Duke Ellington Orchestra to play, gives this great image that I love. I grew up in South Carolina, and in South Carolina you would see a lot of these very old homes out in the fields that were formerly plantations, and often on those old, dilapidated houses you would see rocking chairs still rotting away on the porch. And I think about that a lot when I hear this tune. We're going to play it for you right now. This is Billy Strayhorn's tune, Just A-Sittin' and A-Rockin'.
250 mourners were seated for the 11:30 a.m. service as Ellington arrived and marched purposefully to a roped-off pew in the second row of the 19th century Lutheran church. He sat alone. Before him, the altar was decorated with 20 floral arrangements sent by Strayhorn's family members, friends, admirers, and colleagues like Louis Armstrong. Behind him, the congregation included Lena Horne, the Robinsons, Otto Preminger, Benny Goodman, Carmen McRae, Milt Jackson, and Sylvia Sims, in addition to more than a dozen of Strayhorn's family members in from Pittsburgh. As a prelude to the service, Randy Weston performed a brooding piano rendition of his composition, Blues for Strayhorn. At the piece's conclusion, Weston told the assemblage, "I wrote that song for Billy 2 years ago. I never thought I'd end up playing it at his funeral. It was difficult for me." There were brief Bible readings by the Reverend Ralphie Peterson of St. Peter's and a meditation by Gesell. Scheduled to give the service's only eulogy, Ellington braced the front of his pew with 2 hands as he rose slowly and, gathering himself, walked up and took the pulpit. He had horror in his eyes and a nervous smile. Ellington read what he had written in his hotel room in Reno when he first heard of Strayhorn's death. Poor little sweet pea, Billy Strayhorn, William Thomas Strayhorn, the biggest human being who ever lived,
A man with the greatest courage, the most majestic artistic stature, a highly skilled musician whose impeccable taste commanded the respect of all musicians and the admiration of all listeners. His audiences at home and abroad marveled at the grandeur of his talents and the mantle of tonal supremacy that he wore only with grace. He was a beauty of a human being, adored by a wide range of friends, rich, poor, famous, and unknown. Great artists pay homage to Billy Strayhorn's God-given ability and mastery of his craft, because he had a rare sensitivity and applied himself to his gifts. Billy Strayhorn successfully married melody, words, and harmony, equating the fitting with happiness. His greatest virtue, I think, was his honesty, not only to others, but to himself. His listening, hearing self was totally intolerant of his writing, playing self, when or if any compromise was expected or considered expedient. He spoke English perfectly and French very well, but condescension did not enter into his mind. He demanded freedom of expression and lived in what we consider the most important and moral of freedoms. Freedom from hate unconditionally. Freedom from self-pity, even throughout all the pain and bad news. Freedom from fear of possibly doing something that might help another more than it might help himself. The freedom from the kind of pride that could make a man feel he was better than his brother or neighbor. His patience was incomparable and unlimited. He had no aspirations to enter into any kind of competition. Yet the legacy leaves his au revoir will never be less than the ultimate of the highest plateau of culture, whether by comparison or not. God bless Billy Strayhorn. What could possibly make a man of Duke Ellington's stature say such words? We think of Duke Ellington and honor him as jazz music's and thereby America's greatest composer. Duke Ellington has close to 3,000 registered compositions. Yet we hear these words that he spoke of this often shadowy figure who was in the background of the Duke Ellington Orchestra all those years. And he spoke with such reverence. Well, perhaps he was able to immediately recognize genius as a genius. For instance, the next song we're going to play for you, Billy Strayhorn began composing when he was 15 years old.
Billy Strayhorn was a black man who was openly gay in the 1930s. That was a horrible mix. And it's one of the reasons why his achievements
his compositions, his attributes, the things he did for Duke Ellington were often downplayed and downplayed purposefully because they didn't want the controversy of Strayhorn's life to enter into the equation. And Strayhorn was fairly comfortable with this and usually got credit where credit was due. See, Strayhorn lived in New York City. He didn't tour with Duke Ellington's band. And Duke Ellington paid him very well, treated him like family, and Billy lived quite the playboy lifestyle in New York City as he was writing and composing for Ellington, as well as staying involved in some really amazing cutting-edge diversity things in New York City, sponsoring these various organizations that did all-black artists, all-black dance in the Village area of New York City. Amazing stuff if you study Strayhorn's life. But the unfortunate thing is that he was often cast in the shadow that the great Duke Ellington gave off, being Duke Ellington and being who he was. And many of Duke's most famous tunes are misappropriated to Duke Ellington. They're actually Strayhorn tunes. And just like the theme song, Take the A-Train, most people think Duke Ellington wrote that. This next one we're going to play is pretty startling because you've probably also heard this a billion times, but you've never heard Shelby Carroll play. This is a tune that the legend was that Duke wrote it for his mother, and then the other legend was every town he met a beautiful lady in, he said he wrote it for them. But the truth is that Billy wrote this for his mother, who he was very close with and with whom he shared many things, one of which, fascinatingly, was a love of gardening and a love of growing flowers of all types, which is why there are so many famous Strayhorn compositions with flowers as the title. Those are all for his mom. But this one was for his mom also. was a genius, obviously. And the amazing story of how him and Duke Ellington met, I think, is worth reliving. He was toiling in Pittsburgh, unable to go to college because he couldn't get a scholarship for being a young black man. There was no financial help. This is like 1930s. And Strayhorn couldn't get into any school, although everyone recognized his genius. So he was working at a pharmacy in Pittsburgh. And everyone knew that if you got this young man from this pharmacy in town to deliver your medicine to your house, you could probably talk him into playing a tune or two for you. And that's what everyone did. And as he did this, he got to know everyone in Pittsburgh. And he became very well connected. And lo and behold, the world-famous Duke Ellington Orchestra was going to be playing in Pittsburgh. And one of the people that Billy Strayhorn had met through his association of delivering pharmaceuticals said, I'm going to set up a meeting for you and Duke Ellington. Be at the theater Sunday in the middle of the afternoon after the matinee show, and Duke is going to be waiting for you. So Billy Strayhorn attends the show. He shows up. There's a ticket in will call under his name, goes to the concert, walks to the dressing room afterwards, and he is admitted into Duke Ellington's dressing room where he is sitting in a chair, reclining in his robe, with cucumbers over his eyelid, getting a massage. I kid you not. And Strayhorn walks in and says, Mr. Ellington, I'm Billy Strayhorn. And without moving the cucumbers from his eyelids, Duke gestured towards the upright piano in his dressing room and said, play me something. And Billy Strayhorn said, okay, this afternoon you opened with this song, and this is how you played it. And he sat down and proceeded to play exactly as Duke had played. And then when he finished, he said, now, had I done it, I might have considered doing this. And he played the exact same song in a totally different way. And at this point, Duke has removed the cucumbers from his eyelids. And he says, do another one. And Billy said, okay, the second song, you played this. And he played it just like Duke. And then he said, I would have done this. By this point, Ellington has stood up and is standing behind Strayhorn, hands on his shoulders, says, do the next one. And while Strayhorn starts reliving the set that Ellington played, Ellington is telling people, go get everybody. When Ellington is done with him, the entire band is in Duke Ellington's dressing room watching Billy Strayhorn. So after this amazing display, Duke Ellington, the most famous band leader, pianist, and composer in the world at the time, hired a pianist and composer on the spot. And he hired Billy Strayhorn, and he said, I don't know what I'm going to do with you, but I need you in my organization. And then several months later, Strayhorn ends up moving to New York City, and the rest is history. That's where he had the directions from Duke Ellington to write Take the A-Train. And in many ways, Strayhorn was everything that, not to diminish Ellington, but everything Ellington put airs on that he was. Ellington was thought to be classically trained. I mean, Duke's entire persona, his nickname Duke, came from the fact that he grew up in Washington, D.C. His father worked as a caterer at the White House often and insisted that his son be well-spoken. Because Duke was so well-spoken at a young age, his real name was Edward Kennedy Ellington. His friends nicknamed him Duke. And that's where the mystique really started, where the royalty of Duke Ellington, he's so learned, he's so bilingual, multilingual, multicultural. In actuality, Duke Ellington was a self-made man. He taught himself everything. His first piano playing, he learned by putting his fingers on the player piano and playing along with a James P. Johnson piece. And he slowed it down and learned the fingering, and that's how he learned it. So he was an autodidact, similar to Louis Armstrong. They taught themselves all of this stuff. But here was Strayhorn. He was the scholar. He was amazing. And Duke snatched that up immediately. And the thing about Strayhorn that I think is fabulous throughout his life is he always understood the improvising jazz musician because he was a great pianist. He was participating in jam sessions at Minton's in New York City where bebop was being developed. And it's always interesting to me. You hear Thelonious Monk isms in early Strayhorn as well as Ellington, years before Monk's doing it. So I wanted to make sure that we played one of the beautiful blues heads that Strayhorn played, because I think sometimes people think he was just this kind of like scholarly, nerdy writer. He understood the African American tradition as an African American man, and more importantly, he understood the African tradition. We do not have jazz music without the African culture of the Ghana region, Western Africa, that is brought to the United States through the atrocities of the African slave trade. Those painful things led to the bittersweet joys of jazz music, and Strayhorn understood that, and I think that's what he's expressing here on my favorite Strayhorn blues, entitled The Intimacy of the Blues. Billy Strayhorn's story is a fascinating one, and it doesn't have a happy ending, unfortunately, but it's important to understand his overall body of work, to understand what led to his untimely death. He died of esophageal cancer after a horrible couple of years of struggling through the illness. And he wrote a song throughout his period of cancer treatment that was never performed during or recorded during his life, but it's come to be one of the most powerful ballads, I think, in the history of jazz music. I wanted to read you a little bit about the song before we play it from his biography. The tune is entitled Blood Count. Blood Count is undoubtedly one of Strayhorn's most dramatic works. Strayhorn wrote Blood Count at a time when he was seriously ill with esophageal cancer. It was his final work, scored at the Hospital of Joint Diseases on Manhattan's Upper East Side. In its final form, Blood Count is a wrenching moan, its pedal point bass line evoking the rhythmic drip of intravenous fluid. Whereas the great majority of ballads in jazz and most other American musics deal with romantic love, this piece has a serious, heartbreaking, beautifully focused, and is beautifully focused on the imminent end of life as we know it on earth. There is not the peaceful surrender that one might expect from such a gentle and deep soul. Marion Logan, wife of Dr. Arthur Logan, Strayhorn's physician and close friend, said he didn't write any more after Blood Count. That was the last thing he had to say. It wasn't goodbye or thank you or anything phony like that. It was, this is how I feel. And he felt like shit. Like it or leave it. Well, we're going to close with a song that Billy wrote before his illness took a turn for the worse. And it was written for the hospital that he was being treated at, because it was the first time in New York City that they had a hospital that was run by all black doctors. And this was a huge deal. I wish I could talk about Strayhorn for hours. He was instrumental in fundraising for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the things he was doing. Some amazing stuff. UMMG, as it's known to musicians, it stands for Upper Manhattan Medical Group. That's true.
Josh Hanlon. Young Joe on the bass. My name is Stockton Helbing. Thank you so much. Thanks for hanging out with us. Have a great night. Be safe going home. Thank you. Thank you.